I stood in the center of the Grand Council chamber, wrists bound by a shimmering restraint field that hummed softly with every movement. A symbolic gesture. They knew I didn't need force to be dangerous. No human did anymore. We had evolved past the need for war. Ironically, that was what made them most afraid of us. The speaker towered over me, flanked by representatives of a dozen species. They called this place neutral ground, but I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down from every direction. The speaker's voice sliced through the silence like cold steel. The human delegation is hereby expelled from all council space. Your species will no longer be welcome in our systems. Your treaties are null. Your obligations dissolved. Any future incursions will be regarded as an act of war. His words echoed through the chamber, but none of it surprised me. The vote had already been counted before I stepped through the doors. This wasn't a trial, it was a performance. A final insult after years of slow, calculated betrayals. I looked to the sides. The Karathi ambassador stared down at his desk, avoiding my gaze. Coward. The Sarai representative, once a close friend, pretended to review datapads. Even the Delcarn, who owed their very survival to Terran medical intervention, offered only silence. Not one voice of protest. Not one token word of thanks. I didn't speak. I let the silence spread, stretching so tightly it suffocated the room. It was the only power I had left in that moment. The speaker leaned forward, lips curled in amusement. Nothing to say, human? I met his eyes, not with anger, but with a calm so absolute it made him shift slightly in his seat. We're done speaking, I said. No theatrics. No threats. Just the truth. Gasps rippled around the chamber, but I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away. Alone. The doors sealed behind me, and with them, a chapter of history ended. But the council didn't understand what they had just done. They thought they were casting out a burden. What they had really done was sever the last thread holding the galaxy together. We didn't leave in rage or in fire, we left in silence. But that silence would haunt them, because behind it stood a force they had taken for granted. Not warriors. Not conquerors. But the one species that had always shown up, always cleaned up, always held the line. And now, we were done. No protests. No diplomacy. Just absence. Let them see how well their shining civilization holds without us. Let them feel the emptiness we left behind. They would learn. Not through war. Through regret. We didn't retaliate. We didn't launch fleets or broadcast threats across the stars. No dramatic last stand. No scorched earth. We simply left. The moment I stepped back onto the Terran diplomatic carrier, the message was relayed. Quietly, efficiently, the exodus began. Earth recalled every outpost, every scientist, every medical relief unit stationed across council space. Our trade ships vanished from hyperlanes. Our aid convoys halted mid-transit and turned back. Our deep space stabilizers, once quietly humming to keep entire sectors safe, blinked out one by one. We left nothing behind. No tech, no advisors, no presence. It was as if we had never been there at all. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was truly on its own. And it felt it immediately. The first to feel the sting were the inner council worlds, so used to relying on Terran logistical systems that they had forgotten how to maintain their own. Within days, shipments of food and clean water stalled. Orbital beacons went offline. Communications relays we had built, maintained, and repaired began to flicker. At first, they thought it was sabotage. They sent security drones to investigate. Then they realized it wasn't sabotage. It was absence. They had never noticed how much of their daily life was propped up by us. How deeply we had woven ourselves into the fabric of their civilization, not as rulers, but as caretakers. And now those hands were gone. The cracks were small at first: missed appointments, delayed shipments, unregulated power surges. Then the failures grew bolder, faster, hungrier. Planets that had long depended on Terran agrotech found their crops failing. Medical centers begged for replenishments of Terran-engineered vaccines. No response came. Some tried to re-establish contact, cloaking their desperation in bureaucratic jargon. We seek to reopen productive dialogue. Others dropped the pretense and begged outright. I saw the messages flood into Terran space. Not from their governments, but from their people. Doctors, engineers, mothers, and children. Pleading. But Earth had changed. We weren't angry. We were focused. With no more obligation to the galaxy, we poured everything back into ourselves. Cities once neglected in the name of diplomacy now rose gleaming into the skies. Science surged forward, no longer slowed by compromise or committee. Our fleets returned to orbit, not as conquerors but as guardians, watching, patient, unmoved. The rest of the galaxy kept waiting for our revenge, for the hammer to fall. But we gave them nothing. No attack. No closure. Just distance. They had always feared what humanity might do in anger. What they should have feared was what we would become in indifference. And in that silence, their foundations began to shake. Because without us, the galaxy was left exposed, not to some new enemy, but to the weight of its own dysfunction. We had carried them for so long, they had forgotten how to stand. Now they would learn. One broken piece at a time. It started with Kyrex 7. A glittering jewel of commerce, nestled in the Nexus Belt, once one of the busiest ports in Council space. I remember walking its golden promenades during peace talks, watching fleets of ships coming and going like clockwork. It was a marvel of interstellar cooperation. Humans had helped design its infrastructure, run its traffic systems, maintain its orbital defenses. For over a century, Kyrex 7 thrived because humanity kept its engines running. 3 weeks after our withdrawal, it collapsed. Without our AI management systems, the orbital docks fell into disarray. Shipping schedules spiraled into chaos. The local government tried to adapt, to manually coordinate traffic flow, but they didn't have the personnel, or the patience, or the skill. The first collision, a freight hauler smashing into a medical vessel, killed 7,200 beings. It was followed by 20 more incidents within the week. The Karathi blamed the Sarai. The Sarai accused internal sabotage. No one blamed the truth. They had built a city on human support beams, and then kicked the foundation out from under it. As the station struggled to function, opportunists moved in. Pirate clans, long held at bay by Terran patrols, began circling like vultures. When Kyrex 7 sent a distress call to the Council, no reinforcements came. Their fleets were stretched thin. Many of their ships used Terran tech they no longer understood. Within 2 months, the station was overrun. Not in battle. Not in flames. It simply unraveled. The central dome went dark. Communications ceased. Trade routes that once flowed like blood through that heart now twisted into nothing. The Council quietly declared Kyrex 7 a loss, labeling it a strategic withdrawal. They never mentioned how many had died. How many begged for human help that never came. But I remember. And I watched the feeds, the pixelated, desperate footage of Sarai citizens screaming into cameras as fires raged behind them. "Why aren't the humans coming?" they cried. "Where is Earth?" We heard them. Every word. Every tear. But we didn't answer. Because they had made it clear, they didn't want us. Kyrex 7 was only the beginning. Other worlds followed. Agricultural colonies, unable to maintain climate regulators we'd engineered, fell to famine. Outposts we'd once secured were overrun by mercenary fleets. Medical centers began experiencing outbreaks of diseases humanity had long eradicated with Terran biotech, outbreaks that now spread unchecked. The Council called emergency sessions, debated reallocating resources, formed task forces. They issued decrees, passed laws, launched inquiries. None of it mattered. Because the truth was, they had never learned to do it themselves. We had carried the weight of their survival for too long. And now, with our hands withdrawn, the collapse was not dramatic, it was inevitable. They still didn't understand the scale of the storm they had invited. But they would. Kyrex 7 was only the first whisper. The scream was coming. I met them in a cold room on the edge of Council space, a station we had once built for refugee coordination during the Fourth Expansion War. Now it was half-powered and crumbling, its once pristine walls stained with desperation. The ambassadors looked older, wearier. Even their robes, always pressed and pristine, hung loose with fatigue. These were not the smug envoys I remembered from the chambers. These were desperate beings standing at the edge of collapse. There were 3 of them, a Karathi noble whose family once toasted to Terran engineers, a Sarai diplomat who had danced at my daughter's wedding, and a Delcarn representative with shaking hands and dull eyes. They didn't greet me with ceremony. They didn't posture. They begged. "We were wrong," the Sarai said first. Her voice was brittle. We let politics blind us. Fear, pride. We forgot what you were. What you gave us." The Karathi bowed his head. "Please, help us rebuild. We don't need soldiers. Just your systems. Your advisors. A hand. A whisper of guidance." I listened. Not because I enjoyed it, but because part of me still hoped, for all their arrogance, some sliver of humility might remain. But even in their apology, they reached only for what would save them, not what would make things right. They didn't want partnership. They wanted rescue. "We don't want revenge," the Delcarn muttered. "We want repair." My reply was simple. "No." Silence flooded the chamber like a rising tide. The Delcarn blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly. The Karathi opened his mouth, but no words came. I stood slowly, letting the weight of the moment press in on them. "We were healers when you bled. Builders when your worlds burned. Guardians when your fleets failed. And when you had peace, when the stars grew quiet, you cast us out like shadows. You did not simply reject us. You erased us." I walked past them toward the viewport, where the stars hung like distant memories. "You didn't fear us because we were violent. You feared us because, despite all our strength, we never asked for power. And in your fear, you proved that you were never our allies. Just cowards in borrowed light." None of them followed as I left. That night, I passed through the Hall of Galactic Unity, a corridor of ancient statues meant to represent peace and progress. 6 were human. I remember when they were unveiled, our names carved in gold beside those who had shaped the galaxy's future. Now, dust covered our names. The lighting dimmed deliberately so no one would remember who held the line when the stars bled. But we remembered. And now, in our silence, they remembered too. Because it wasn't our weapons that terrified them. It was what we built, what we gave, and what they had lost forever. Not with a bang, but with our absence. It happened faster than even I anticipated. The council began to fracture, not from invasion, not from external threats, but from within. The unity they had flaunted for centuries was only ever skin-deep, a fragile illusion held together by Terran discipline and silent compromise. Without us to mediate, to balance, to keep the gears turning, everything began to unravel. The Karathi accused the Delcarn of hiding Terran tech. The Delcarn blamed the Sarai for sabotaging relief routes. The Sarai, in turn, blamed the Karathi for hoarding agricultural resources meant for the border colonies. Tempers flared into border skirmishes, then open naval confrontations. What used to be handled with negotiations, rooms we once filled with translators, neutral moderators, logic, weapons now answered. I watched one such broadcast in my home on Earth. A Karathi fleet, sleek and bristling with weapons, opening fire on a Delcarn medical vessel. The explosion took 2,700 lives. Not a single council voice condemned it. How could they? The council chamber itself had shuddered after the last vote devolved into screaming and walkouts. The very institution that had condemned us had now crumbled under its own hypocrisy. Refugees flooded the stars, drifting toward the edge of Terran space, hoping, praying, for mercy. Many wore old Terran uniforms, dusty and torn. Mechanics, doctors, farmers, people who had once worked with us and now remembered. They sent messages begging for sanctuary. We didn't respond. We had become ghosts to them. Watchers. A civilization that once held out open hands, now kept them folded. Not out of cruelty, out of principle. We had given the galaxy everything. When they were weak, we lifted them. When they were sick, we healed them. When they fell, we caught them. And they called us dangerous, arrogant, untrustworthy. They cast us out with ceremony and silence. So now, we did nothing. And it was killing them. The worst part, they knew. Every council broadcast, every news relay, every shaky holovid of a crumbling system, it all ended the same way. Where are the humans? Their children asked. Their leaders avoided the question. Their history scrolls tried to rewrite the past. But their people knew. Deep in their bones, they knew. This wasn't a war. It was the absence of grace. The Terran Alliance didn't blockade their borders. We didn't ignite their cities. We didn't press a single button. We simply walked away. And that void, that empty space where we once stood shoulder to shoulder with them, echoed louder than any battle cry. They weren't being punished. They were being forgotten. And in that silence, they finally saw us, not as brutes or threats, but as the very balance that once kept the galaxy from consuming itself. And now, with the balance gone, the weight crushed everything. The Council had never known desperation until then. What remained of their fractured leadership scrambled to project strength. They held hollow press conferences, paraded empty fleets, and declared sanctions against systems that no longer cared what the Council had to say. They tried to appear united, but even from Earth, we could see the cracks running deep beneath the surface. The facade was shattering, and they all knew it. So they turned, at last, back to us. A formal transmission arrived in Terran orbit, high priority, encrypted, wrapped in every ancient protocol of respect and apology. I was called to the review chamber with a handful of our remaining diplomats. The message played once. No one spoke as the speaker's face flickered into view, no longer smug, but tired, sunken, human almost, in his defeat. He offered reparations. Apologies. Offered to rewrite every treaty. Offered seats on the Council, permanent ones. Offered joint leadership. Shared governance. I stood at the edge of that room, staring at the image of a man who once smiled as he voted to cast us into the void. And now he pleaded for our return, not out of friendship, not out of recognition, but because they were drowning without us. When the message ended, we let the silence sit. Then we deleted it. No reply. No comment. No acknowledgement. Because they still didn't understand. You don't get to throw someone away and then ask them to save you. Not when your reason for needing them is the very thing you denied existed. We were never looking for domination. We only ever gave. And when we left, they didn't fall because we attacked, but because we were the only ones holding them up. Their systems began to fall like stars blinking out in the void. Refugee populations exploded. Entire sectors lost power grids they no longer knew how to maintain. Political assassinations became common in Council-controlled space. Several planets declared themselves free states and abandoned the Council's banner. Civil wars ignited, not between species, but within them. And through it all, Earth remained silent. We rebuilt our own. Restored old cities. Focused on education, art, science. Freed from the weight of interstellar compromise, we moved faster than ever. Our orbital rings thrived. Our colonies expanded in harmony. Humanity prospered, not with vengeance, but with clarity. I sometimes watched the feeds alone late at night. Not out of satisfaction, but reflection. They had underestimated us so profoundly that they only ever saw our strength as threat, not as structure. They never saw that their peace wasn't theirs. It was ours, loaned to them, carried by Terran shoulders too broad to notice until they were gone. I saw the last footage from the Grand Council chambers the day it fell. Fire engulfed the sky beyond its domes. Delegates screaming, systems failing. The speaker's final words broadcasted before the signal cut. We should have never let them leave. They hadn't let us. We chose to walk. And now, they were left to suffer. Years passed. The galaxy quieted, not from peace, but from exhaustion. The wars had burned through resources, alliances, and hope. Entire systems now drifted in silence, their planets scarred, their skies empty. The Council was gone. What remained of it dissolved into scattered remnants, powerless and irrelevant. The proud coalition that once ruled the stars from marble halls now existed only in shattered monuments and fading memories. On Earth, the stars looked different. Brighter, maybe. Or perhaps it was just that we were no longer blinded by duty. Humanity had turned inward, not in retreat, but in renewal. Our cities pulsed with life. Our children learned from real history, unfiltered by politics. Our technology advanced at a pace the old Council would have feared. We no longer sought approval. We no longer asked to belong. I was older now, my service long done. I spent my days near the Terran archives, where we kept the records of our involvement in galactic affairs. Not to boast. Not for pride. But so we would never forget what we gave, and what it cost us. One afternoon, a message arrived through an old relay, an unencrypted transmission from a distant colony once aligned with the Council. It was from a young historian, a child by the sound of their voice. Their species wasn't even one I recognized, but their words were soft and curious. What were the humans like? They asked. Why did they leave? I didn't respond, at least not directly. But I wrote the message down. Thought about it for a long time. Not because I didn't have the answer, but because it was too big for one voice. Too deep for one sentence. We had been too many things, to too many people. We were warriors. Yes. But more than that, we were builders. Healers. Diplomats. Architects of peace no one noticed until it was gone. We walked into chaos not to conquer, but to steady it. We gave more than we should have. And when we were betrayed, we didn't retaliate. We simply left. Not out of hatred, but because we finally understood our worth. And when we did, the galaxy was forced to understand it too. I visited the Monument of the Lost soon after. A quiet place on the moon, carved into the rock, with no lights, no fanfare. Just names. Millions of them. Engineers. Medics. Soldiers. Teachers. All those who had died in service to a galaxy that would never thank them. They didn't need thanks. They needed to be remembered. That's what I wanted the historian to know. That we left not in rage, but in silence. That silence was louder than any fleet, more final than any weapon. And in that silence, the galaxy finally heard us. Not the noise of war, but the weight of absence. And in the end, the Council was left alone, broken, and we, humanity, were no longer watching. Because we didn't need to. We had already said everything that mattered. By walking away.